Hi everyone, we're here with Molly Mitchell, who's running for Seattle School Board, position 6. Would you like to go ahead with your 2-minute introduction?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me here today, and also want to say I use she, her pronouns as well. And the reason why I'm running for school board director is because I believe that all kids should have a pathway to success. I'm a mom, I'm a community organizer. I also work at Seattle Central College doing supports for people furthest from educational justice. So I work with student veterans, I work with those who are currently incarcerated and those who are formerly incarcerated. Those are transitioning through the foster care system, also providing food insecurity support and housing support, which are all really challenging things in our city. And I want to bring that boots on the ground work. I've been working in education overall for 20 years, so my entire career has been working in education with most of my work being on doing equity work and social justice work and bringing education to those who are farthest from educational justice. So I believe that I have the experience and the passion and compassion to work collaboratively across the city to ensure that Seattle Public Schools is a place where all of our students can thrive and survive.
Great, thank you. And now we'll, if you want to flip that piece of paper over, you can follow along. We'll do 2-minute responses for these questions on this paper, starting with Constance.
So what steps will you take, what specific steps will you take as a member of the school board to work toward racial equity in our schools?
Yeah. So racial equity work is something I've been doing my entire career, and it's actually really what I'm focused on right now in my professional work, and would love to bring that to the board. Pieces of that I think we have the largest opportunity gap, 5th largest opportunity gap in the country, and that's embarrassing for a city like Seattle. And so I think bringing to that work, we need to be hiring more teachers of color. Kids need to see people who look like them in the classroom. One of the things at Seattle Central, we're actually partnered with Seattle Public Schools, and we are pushing out cohorts of teachers of color. So I just had the chance to meet our first cohort, and they will be paraprofessionals while they're at Seattle Central getting ready to be teachers. So that's exciting. We need to see more of that. We also need to not only insert ethnic studies, but we need to fund it appropriately in order for people in the classroom. We also need to remember how to engage in real relationships. People can't learn in a classroom where they don't feel seen, heard, or respected. And so there's really some minor things that we also have to do, which is about making connections with people. And I think we forget about that a lot. But we definitely need to be hiring. We need to look at our curriculum. We need to always have a racial equity lens in everything we're doing. So it shouldn't be, today we're talking about racial equity, and tomorrow we're looking at funding. All those things are interconnected, and we have to have that at the forefront.
Great, thank you. Kelsey?
Last spring, many community members and board directors said that the district's enrollment projections were significantly flawed and would lead to larger class sizes and unnecessary teacher layoffs at high schools. Last week, those concerns became reality, with large class sizes and overcrowded classrooms at most high schools, and helped fuel student walkouts for equitable funding. What will you do as a board member to ensure the district accurately projects enrollments in the future?
So, thank you for that, and I've been watching that. I think the first thing I would have to do is be able to get there and see what was the flaw in the projection. You know, where was the kink in that whole system that was set up, and how are we currently doing those projections? We should have seen this coming from the beginning. And another interesting thing that happened at a number of elementary schools where kids were dropped from the roster, and so parents showed up to drop off their kids, and they were turned away from school. They were told, you don't attend school here, and you have to go back to the district to re-enroll. So imagine being a young person being told you don't belong. That's not a good start for school at all. And so we need to ensure, how are we doing projections? Because a lot of times we then say, well, we'll get it worked out in October. Well, that's a long time to go, to be displaced or to be disheartened or to not have the right supports. And the district's known about these problems because they've happened in the past with classrooms in our high schools where there's no teacher. They're just given worksheets because they don't have the right number of teachers in the school. So at the heart of the work we have to do is making sure that we have teachers in our schools and kids not overloaded in our classrooms.
Thank you.
Students in special education continue to not receive the education that they are morally and legally entitled to. How would you ensure that students, educators, including paraprofessionals, and schools are supported both with policy and funding?
Well, I'm just gonna read it one more time. So this is close to me because I have a daughter who utilizes special education supports. And one of the reasons why I even decided to join the race was as a mom, as an educator, as somebody who's a salaried worker, I had the time and the language to come down to the school to advocate for my kid. I've been advocating for her since she's in kindergarten, and she's now in 3rd grade. And seeing that, to get her all those supports, what about all those other students for whom they don't have an advocate who can come to the school, who understands what the needs are? And so I wanna make sure that I'm advocating for all students. Not only that we're ensuring 504, that kids have access to our schools. For some schools, they try to turn students away and say, why don't you go to this other school, not in your neighborhood, because you'll have better access. And that shouldn't be happening. But then also in our IEPs. Ideally, I would love to see every single student who walks into a classroom have an IEP. Everybody should understand what their learning is, and every teacher would be well equipped to have every student come to them and say, this is how I learn best. And it shouldn't just be a special education. Everybody should be getting connected in that way. So as a board member, I think it's important that all kids have a pathway to success, and that includes special education. The other thing, the district is wasting money by not serving kids with dyslexia. And so they have said that we can't serve kids with dyslexia. If we do, we have to pay for them to go to Hamlin Robinson School. My daughter ended up at Hamlin Robinson School. The district isn't paying for it, but we had to choose, and even the principal told us this was a thing that she can't recommend, and her IEP will never say dyslexia. It simply just says can't decode and all the other things that make up dyslexia.
Thank you. And that was the 4th, right? Yeah, that was 3, sorry. Number 4, Clayton, sorry.
What factors would you weigh, and how would you decide to alter attendance boundaries and determine the populations that will attend the school? Right now, for example, Robert Eagle's staff is incredibly overcrowded, while Whitman Middle School is far under capacity. How would you address situations like this? The superintendent seems to be advocating for Licton Springs K-8 to be moved away from its current site. Do you support the superintendent's plan?
So one of the things I think we need to think about in this boundary conversation is that we need to get back into community and talk to those who are the most impacted. We tend to make these decisions out here and think that we're making all the right decisions for people who are actually impacted. And so I think we definitely need to have community involvement when we're looking at these boundaries, but we also need to factor how are we gonna make it racially equitable? How are we not gonna make schools where, we have schools right now where there seems to be an abundance amount of wealth, and so those schools can fund things where other schools cannot. And then it's creating this us against them in our whole Seattle public school system. So the boundary is an area that I would definitely want to explore more, but I also want to explore it within communities impacted. The Licton K-8, at this point, I wouldn't support the superintendent because, again, it's about the community impacted. You know, I was just reading this morning, people were talking about the wonderful experiences they have there, and so wanting to stay. So I think we have to get away from ripping things from areas without communicating well first, and allowing people who are impacted again to be part of that solution and part of that problem. Still not gonna make everybody happy, somebody's gonna get upset. But how are we making those decisions? And if our strategic plan says serving students furthest from educational justice needs to be a focus, then we also need to have that as the front of our lens when we're drawing boundaries.
Thank you. And now we'll open it up to questions from the board as a whole. These responses are 1 minute each, starting with Summer, then going to Matt.
If elected, would you maintain the Seattle Public Schools' current policy of opposing new charter schools? And then also, would you advocate against privatization and corporate control in the district, and how would you do that?
So yes, one of the ways I would make sure that we're not having new charter schools open is making sure that Seattle Public Schools is the place that people don't want to leave. I'm not going to shame families for choices that they make. I didn't feel great that my kid is not in her neighborhood school. We still take her to the playground there after school, just so she can still be in her community. But, so yes, I would not be working towards charter schools or supporting. And then the other half of your question was?
How would you advocate against privatization and corporate control in our district, and how?
So yeah, we would have to look at getting away from taking those grants from the corporation, because when they do that, they also attach with them their expectations. And a lot of these corporations don't even really understand education, but they want to stamp their name on, look what we did for this space. So we have to be very careful and strategic. And I think what we need to do more is we need to be working together to make the legislature fully fund education. That's who we should be holding accountable. As long as we continue to put these Band-Aids on with outside supports and resources, then the legislature goes, great, you know, they're taking care of it, they're handling it. And so I think we need to get back to the legislature.
Great, thank you, Matt, and then Clayton, and then Jamie, and then Constance.
So you spoke on question 3 about your passion and your want to advocate for students, whether they have an IEP plan, a 504 plan, or no plan. But I want to just ask a quick follow-up. What role do you think self-advocacy for students with disabilities should play in developing an IEP or a 504 plan?
Can you ask that to me in a different way?
Do you think students should be encouraged or have a role at all in developing their IEP or 504 accommodations, or do you think that role lasts or rests solely in the parents and the administration?
Oh, I think as kids get older, they should increasingly take responsibility for that role. And as they understand what their toolkit needs are, then they should be advocating for those. So one of the areas that I also used to run at Seattle Central was a disability office. And so being able to get students coming in to separate from family advocacy, although families felt so harmed that they come into the next educational institution wanting to fight. And then so being able to watch students then be able to take responsibility for their own learning needs. And so my goal with my own daughter is to get her away from me and understanding what her learning needs are so that she can advocate for herself. But I do think that many families feel like it was such a fight to get anybody to hear that it's hard to get away from that fight mode.
Thank you. Next is Clayton.
Pardon my confusion about selecting which of about 10 questions I would like to ask. I'm concerned about the resegregation of schools, about the total collapse of Brownlee Board of Education. I'm concerned about the use of programs within the Seattle School District to ensure that upper middle income kids get prepared for college. And I'm concerned about the freight of segregation that carries. So can you tell us what percentage of kids taking AP classes, how AP classes break down by race? And I'm concerned about the dynamic that goes on between counselor and student and parents when, in the 9th grade, a decision is made as to whether a kid is ready for AP.
Yeah, so I think that is a huge problem, and actually I'm gonna take that all the way back to, it starts in elementary school, right? And so when we are so focused on testing, then the kids are tracked already. By the time you get into 9th grade, if you haven't taken a certain math, it's over. You're not gonna get into this track. But I think the other thing, we have such a focus on AP, and if we wanna step back and even look at racial equity, AP classes are also upholding white supremacy. The courses that are offered, and then colleges look and see that as more acceptable or more rigorous or more challenging than any other curriculum. I used to work in college admissions. I had to like bleach myself after doing that work because it was so awful to see how we were tracking people and you know, deciding what is important and what matters and what doesn't. But the other piece is, I think we also need to allow students, it's not just about college. There are jobs out there that people can take, you can come to Seattle Central College and get a construction program, and get out making $50,000. I have more to say.
Jamie?
I would like to hear more of your thoughts on how the district could be better addressing dyslexia.
So one of the ways the district could do better is they used to have the Slinginger model of teaching reading. The Slinginger model works for everybody. And this is why we need to have universal design concepts in our mind too, and when we approach things. When you reach people furthest from justice, you actually bring in everybody. So the Slinginger model of reading, Seattle Public Schools used to have, but they did away with it. And so, but everybody learns to read with the Slinginger model. Basically, it engages all parts of your brain while you're learning to read. So you sound it out, you I don't know what the word is for what I'm doing. And then you make a sound attached to it. And there's more with that, but it's decoding. But all students can learn well if we're decoding the language. And students with other learning disabilities can engage with that better as well. So I'd love to see them bring it back.
Constance?
This goes to this question about playtime. So a KUOW investigation showed that in Seattle Public Schools, poor kids and children of color tend to get much less recess than kids at mostly white well-off schools. Recently, Seattle made a minimum of 30 minutes of recess for each school, but while everyone's doing the minimum, it's the wealthier students that get 45 minutes or more. So what should or can the school board do to fix that when we know that playtime has a significant impact on emotional and academic well-being of children?
Absolutely. So the district or school board made the policy of 30 minutes, so we need to enforce that. But then also adding on, are you doing 30 minutes in 10-minute increments? Are you moving from lunch to back? What are we actually calling as playtime, and parsing that out and ensuring that it's actual play as we mean it to be, which is being outside or being in a gym. Outside is the best, because it also works for brain development. When our brains move, when we move, our brains get oxygen and we can learn better. And kids with various disabilities, who need that time to get the energy out, we're also gonna reduce discipline in our schools by allowing kids to play. This also goes back for me, we're so stuck on getting the testing done and getting test scores and teaching to the test that we forget all the other things that make kids successful in learning. And when I say successful, I mean in whatever way that kid feels good about themselves, not some standardized chart that they have to live up to.
Great, thank you. Are there any other questions anybody might have? Clayton?
This, unlike my other questions, will seem off the wall. However, would you support teaching of Latin in junior high school? I ask because it's something that can be transformational in several respects. One of which is learning to work. So what do you think?
I don't know that I have an opinion much. I think it could work for learning the roots of words, but maybe you want to do that earlier. I can't say that it would be the top 10 things that I would fight for.
You might think about that.
Okay. I'll look into it more.
Any other questions? No? All right, seeing no further questions, if you would like to take 30 seconds to wrap up.
Sure. I again want to thank you for your time. It's been never seeing myself as a politician, it's been a very interesting process, and one that I hope that either way I'll be able to mentor other women and other women of color, especially to go through this process. It's really challenging. But I also hope to be able to serve our community on school board so that we can see real change happen that our kids and families and teachers deserve.
Great, thank you.